They thought I'd walk away quietly, fade into the background like I always did. But when he touched my father's legacy, the house he built with his own hands, the workshop where we restored that '68 Mustang together, he awakened something I'd buried for years: the fake smiles, the family dinners, those sickeningly sweet offers to help. Steve believed I was weak, that I'd surrender everything, but when he started tearing apart every memory my father left behind, I chose a different path. I turned my silence into a weapon and decided to take back everything. My name is Rachel Carter, and I'm 35 years old. I work as a senior software architect at Nexora Technologies in Portland. But that's not what defines me. What defines me is the promise I made to my father, Thomas Carter, before his heart gave out on a rainy Tuesday morning 3 years ago. Dad wasn't just a small construction business owner in Oregon. He was an artist who worked with wood and concrete, a philosopher who found wisdom in measuring twice and cutting once, growing up in our middle-class neighborhood. I learned that legacy wasn't about money. "Rachel," he'd say, his calloused hands steady on my shoulders, "what we leave behind isn't in bank accounts. It's in the values we instill, the memories we create, and the things we build to last." Our craftsman-style house stood as proof of his philosophy. Dad built it himself in 1985, 2 years before I was born. Every beam, every joint, every carefully selected piece of Douglas fir told a story. The built-in bookshelves in the living room weren't just storage. They were where he taught me to organize my thoughts as meticulously as we organized his tools. Each drill bit, each wrench, each saw blade had its designated place in his workshop, and he insisted I learn the same discipline. That workshop was my second school. While other kids spent afternoons at soccer practice or dance lessons, I spent mine in that sawdust-scented sanctuary, learning the difference between oak and pine, between a Phillips and a flathead, between giving up and pushing through. The crown jewel of our time together was the 1968 Mustang Fastback rusting in the corner when I turned 13. "This will teach you patience," Dad said. And he was right. Every weekend for 4 years, we worked on that car replacing parts, sanding rust, learning that some things are worth the long effort. The Mustang ran perfectly by the time I left for college. I can still remember the pride in Dad's eyes when we took it for that first drive down Highway 26 windows down, the engine purring like it had just rolled off the assembly line. You see, Rachel, when you commit to something, when you pour your soul into it, it becomes more than just an object. It becomes part of your story. Before the cancer diagnosis, before the chemotherapy that didn't work, before those final weeks in hospice, Dad made everything crystal clear. He'd prepared a detailed estate plan, every document filed correctly, every intention spelled out in black and white. The house would be mine, along with his tools, the workshop, and that Mustang. Mom would have her retirement accounts and life insurance, more than enough to live comfortably. "I need you to promise me something," he said from his hospital bed, his voice barely above a whisper but his eyes still sharp. "That house is more than wood and nails. It's where your mother and I built our life, where you took your first steps, where 3 generations of Carters have made memories. Whatever happens, don't let anyone take it from you. Not the bank, not developers, not anyone who doesn't understand what it means." I held his hand, feeling the calluses that told the story of a lifetime of honest work. "I promise, Dad, I'll protect it." He squeezed back, weaker than I'd ever felt from him, but still there. "I know you will. You're stronger than you think, Rachel. You've got my stubbornness and your mother's intelligence. That's a dangerous combination when someone tries to take what's yours." 3 days later, he was gone. The funeral was a blur of casseroles and condolences, of people telling me how much Dad meant to the community, how many families he'd helped build their dreams. Mom stood beside me, hollow-eyed and lost, and I knew I had to be strong for both of us. I never imagined that the greatest threat to Dad's legacy wouldn't come from outside. It would walk through our front door wearing a sympathetic smile and calling itself family. The grief hit Mom like a tsunami. Margaret Carter, who'd been Dad's partner in everything for 37 years, suddenly couldn't function. She'd stand in the kitchen holding his coffee mug for hours, or sit in his workshop chair just staring at his tools. I moved back home temporarily, taking remote work days to help her through the worst of it. 3 months after the funeral, our pastor suggested Mom join the church's grief support group. I thought it was a good idea. She needed to talk to people who understood that particular flavor of loss. Every Wednesday evening, she'd drive to St. Matthew's, returning slightly less hollow each time. By the 4th month, she mentioned someone named Steve. "He lost his wife 2 years ago," she said, stirring sugar into her tea. "Breast cancer. He understands what it's like." Steve Hollister appeared at our door on a Saturday morning 6 months after Dad's death. 58 years old, silver-haired, with the kind of practiced charm that should have set off alarms but somehow didn't. He wore a perfectly pressed polo shirt and khakis, carrying a toolbox. "Margaret mentioned the kitchen faucet was leaking," he said, extending his hand. "Steve Hollister. I used to be in construction myself. Before I retired, thought I could help." Used to be in construction. Those words made my chest tighten. Nobody could replace Dad in his own workshop, but Mom's face lit up for the first time in months. How could I object to anything that brought her even a moment of happiness? Steve fixed the faucet, then stayed for coffee. He admired Dad's work on the house, saying all the right things about the craftsmanship, the attention to detail. "Thomas was a true artist," he said, running his hand along the crown molding. "You don't see work like this anymore." The visits became regular: Tuesday dinners, Saturday repairs, Sunday lunches after church. Steve was always helpful, always respectful, always careful to mention Dad's memory in reverent tones. Mom started smiling again, started cooking real meals instead of living on frozen dinners. I convinced myself this was healthy, that Dad would want her to be happy. The announcement came like a slap. 6 months after that first faucet repair, barely a year after Dad's death, Mom sat me down in the living room. "Steve and I have grown very close," she said, twisting her wedding ring, which she still wore. "He's asked to move in, and I've said yes." The room spun. "Move in, Mom. You've known him for 6 months. I'm 62 years old. Rachel, I don't have time for long courtships. I'm lonely in this big house, and Steve makes me feel less alone." "But Dad, your father is gone." The sharpness in her voice stunned me. I loved him with everything I had, but he's gone, and I'm still here. Don't I deserve some companionship, some happiness? What could I say? That it felt too fast. That something about Steve made my skin crawl, that I'd noticed him evaluating our house like an appraiser. His eyes calculating square footage and market value. I had no proof. Just instinct. And Mom's happiness seemed to trump my discomfort. "Besides," Mom continued, softer now, "Steve's been so lost since his wife died. His children live out of state, and he's all alone. We can help each other heal." Children. She mentioned it so casually, but my stomach dropped. Children. Kyle and Lydia. They're adults, of course around your age. Steve says they might visit once we're all settled. The moving truck arrived 2 weeks later. Steve didn't have some furniture, boxes of clothes, golf clubs. He set up in Dad's study, pushing Dad's desk against the wall to make room for his own leather recliner. I bit my tongue. Choose your battles, I told myself. But watching him walk through our house like he belonged there, sitting in Dad's spot at the dinner table, parking his Lexus where Dad's truck used to be, each small invasion felt like betrayal. Mom glowed with her new happiness, blind to my discomfort, deaf to my carefully worded concerns. "Just give him a chance," she pleaded. "He's a good man. Rachel, he makes me laugh again." So I tried. I really tried. I showed up for dinners, made small talk about his golf game, pretended not to notice when he started referring to it as our house instead of Margaret's house. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that Mom deserved happiness, that I could endure this for her sake. I had no idea that Steve's arrival was just the beginning. The real invasion was yet to come. Kyle and Lydia arrived 3 weeks after Steve moved in, supposedly for a weekend visit. Kyle, 31, wore designer workout clothes and carried himself with the swagger of someone who'd never earned an honest dollar. Lydia, 29, clutched her phone like a lifeline, documenting everything for her Instagram followers. They took one look at our house, and I saw the same calculating gleam I'd noticed in Steve's eyes. "Dad, this place is huge," Kyle exclaimed, wandering through rooms uninvited. "That garage could be an amazing gym space." My blood chilled. That garage was Dad's workshop, where the Mustang still sat under its cover, where his tools hung in their designated spots exactly as he'd left them. The weekend visit extended to a week, then 2. Steve casually mentioned they were between places and needed somewhere to stay temporarily. Mom, ever gracious, insisted we had plenty of room. I watched, helpless, as they colonized our home. Kyle started his transformation of the workshop without asking anyone. I came home from work to find Dad's pegboard of hand tools gone, replaced with mirrors. His workbench, handcrafted from reclaimed oak, had been shoved into a corner to make room for weight equipment. "What the hell are you doing?" I confronted him, my hands shaking. "Relax, Rachel. It's just temporary reorganization. This space was being wasted anyway, dusty tools nobody uses." "Those are my father's tools. This is his workshop." Kyle shrugged, adjusting his backwards baseball cap. "Steve said it was fine. Besides, it's not like your dad needs them anymore." I found Steve in Dad's study, feet up on Dad's desk, watching golf on his phone. "You gave Kyle permission to destroy the workshop." He looked up slowly, that practiced smile spreading across his face. "Destroy is a strong word. Rachel, we're maximizing the space. This is a family home now, not a museum." "It's my home. My name is on the deed." "Actually," Steve set down his phone, "it's your mother's home too, and as her partner, I'm helping her make decisions about our living space. You might own it on paper, but Margaret has a right to enjoy her home how she sees fit." Meanwhile, Lydia had launched her own campaign. She convinced Mom that the house needed updating to match current trends. The handcrafted, built-in shelving Dad had spent months perfecting, too dark and oppressive. The original hardwood floors he'd salvaged and restored, so outdated nobody has real wood anymore. I came home one Friday to find contractors ripping up the dining room floor. The 100-year-old pine boards, which Dad had carefully restored plank by plank, were being tossed into a dumpster like trash. "Stop!" I shouted. "What are you doing?" Lydia emerged from the kitchen, sipping a green juice. "Oh, Rachel, don't be dramatic. We're installing luxury vinyl. It's waterproof and so much more practical. You can't just renovate my house without permission." "Steve handled the permits," she said breezily. "He knows all the contractors from his old business. We're getting such a good deal." His old business, the one he'd never elaborated on, the one that had somehow left him living alone in a rental before meeting my mother. The destruction accelerated. They held a garage sale while I was at a work conference, selling Dad's vintage tools to strangers for pennies on the dollar. His router, which he'd taught me to use when I was 16, went for $5. The hand-carved jewelry box he'd made for Mom on their anniversary sold for $3. When I confronted Mom, she looked tired. "They're just things, Rachel. Steve says holding on to clutter is unhealthy." Clutter. Dad's life work is clutter. "You're being overly sentimental. Steve is trying to help us move forward." Steve had mastered the art of psychological manipulation. Every objection I raised was met with calm condescension. I was too attached to the past. I was making Margaret unhappy with my negativity. I was creating a hostile environment for the family. The final straw came when I found Kyle listing the Mustang on Craigslist. "That's my car," I said, barely controlling my rage. "Steve said it's a family asset. We need the money for the renovation." "Get out of my workshop, now." Kyle laughed. "Your workshop last I checked, little girl. Possession is 9/10 of the law, and right now, this is my gym." That night, I heard Steve talking to Mom in their bedroom. "I hate to say it, Margaret, but Rachel's becoming a problem. Maybe it would be better if she found her own place, for everyone's mental health." Mom's response was muffled, but I heard her crying. Steve was turning her against me, using her grief and loneliness as weapons, and it was working. I sat in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the sounds of destruction, Kyle's weights clanging in the workshop, contractors hammering downstairs, Lydia FaceTiming loudly in the next room. Dad's house was disappearing piece by piece, and everyone expected me to smile and accept it. That's when Steve made his biggest mistake. He thought my silence meant surrender. He thought I was weak, beaten down, ready to walk away. He had no idea that I was my father's daughter, and I'd inherited more than just his house. I'd inherited his patience, his attention to detail, and his absolute refusal to let anyone take what was ours. The ambush came on a Sunday after church. I walked into the living room to find it full of people, aunts, uncles, cousins, Mom's book club friends, even Pastor David. Steve stood at the center, wearing his concerned citizen face. "Rachel, we're all here because we love you," he began, and I immediately understood. This was an intervention, and I was the problem being solved. Mom sat on the couch, tears already streaming. "Sweetheart, we're worried about you. This anger, this inability to accept change, it's not healthy." Aunt Carol, Dad's own sister, chimed in. "Your father wouldn't want you living in the past. Rachel, he'd want your mother to be happy." They took turns, each person Steve had carefully recruited delivering their rehearsed concerns. I was selfish. I was clinging to material possessions. I was dishonoring my father's memory by causing strife in the family, through it all. Steve stood there like a benevolent patriarch, occasionally patting Mom's shoulder, playing the role of the stabilizing force in a troubled household. "We think," Steve finally said, "that it might be best if you took some time away. Get some perspective. I know this transition has been hard for you." "You want me to leave my own house?" "Nobody's asking you to leave permanently," he said smoothly. "Just take a break. For your mother's health. The stress you're causing her isn't good for her heart." The cruelty of that statement, using Mom's health as a weapon, took my breath away. I looked at Mom, hoping to see some recognition of what was happening, but she just nodded through her tears. "Please, Rachel," she whispered, "just for a little while, until you can accept our new family." Our new family. As if Dad could be replaced like those vinyl floors. I stood up slowly, scanning the room of people I'd known my whole life, now turned against me by Steve's careful manipulation. "You want me gone, fine, but I need a few days to arrange things." Relief washed over their faces. Steve's eyes gleamed with victory. That night, I sat in Dad's workshop, Kyle's gym, after everyone had gone to bed. I pulled out the drawer beneath the workbench, the hidden one Dad had showed me when I was 12. "Every workshop needs a secret," he'd said. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were his most precious tools and a manila envelope. The letter inside was dated a year before his death. "Rachel, if you're reading this, things have probably gotten complicated. Your mother is a wonderful woman, but she's trusting to a fault. I've set aside some documents here that Michael Grant has copies of. He handled all my legal work and knows what to do. Don't let anyone take what I built for you. Remember, patience and planning beat anger and haste every time. Love, Dad." Beneath the letter were photographs of every original feature of the house, receipts for materials, and detailed documentation of the home's historic elements. Dad had known. Somehow, he'd known. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to Michael Grant's office. The old lawyer smiled when he saw me. "I wondered when you'd come. Your father said you'd know when it was time." "They're trying to force me out, Michael." "I know. Steve Hollister has been making inquiries about the deed transfer process. Seems to think he can convince you to sign over your rights." "Never." Michael leaned back in his chair. "Your father set things up very specifically. The house is yours, free and clear. But Steve's playing a different game: social pressure, family manipulation. Legal ownership means nothing if they make your life unbearable. So what do I do? You document everything. Every change they make, every item they sell, every penny they spend on renovations. Oregon law is very specific about property rights and unauthorized modifications. And Rachel. He pulled out a business card. This is a private investigator I've worked with. Might be worth looking into Mr. Hollister's background. I spent the next week playing the broken daughter. I apologized to Mom, told Steve I understood his position, even helped Lydia pick out new curtains, all while secretly photographing every change, saving every receipt I could find, recording conversations on my phone. The private investigator's report was a goldmine. Steve's successful construction business had gone bankrupt after multiple lawsuits for shoddy work and fraud. He'd left 3 previous women in financial ruin, each time moving on when the money ran out. His children had their own histories, Kyle with assault charges, Lydia with credit card fraud. But the most damning discovery came from the security camera Dad had hidden in the workshop rafters, one that uploaded to a cloud account only I knew about. It had captured Steve on the phone with someone. The old lady's daughter is the only problem. Once she signs over her rights, we can get a home equity loan, flip this place, and clear at least $500,000. Mom wasn't his partner. She was his mark. I sat in my car outside Michael's office, the evidence spread across the passenger seat. Steve thought he'd won by turning everyone against me. He thought social pressure would break me, that I'd choose family harmony over property rights. He was wrong. Dad taught me that sometimes you have to let people think they're winning right until the moment you show them they've already lost. Steve wanted to play games with my family, fine. But he'd forgotten one crucial thing in this house that my father built. I knew where all the bodies were buried. I stopped fighting. That was the first thing everyone noticed. No more arguments about the renovations. No more protests when Kyle sold another piece of Dad's equipment. No more tears when Lydia threw out Mom's handmade quilts, calling them dusty relics. I became the model of acceptance. "I'm glad you're finally seeing reason," Steve said one evening, pouring himself Dad's aged whiskey from Dad's cabinet. "This family needs harmony." "You're right," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I've been thinking about what's best for everyone." Behind my compliance, I was building a case with Michael Grant that would be bulletproof. We organized everything into 3 strategic phases, each designed to dismantle Steve's plan piece by piece. Phase 1. Documentation. I created a detailed inventory of every unauthorized change to the property. The security camera footage showed Steve instructing contractors to ignore building codes. I photographed the original hardwood floors in the dumpster, still bearing the historic registry marks that made their destruction a violation of local preservation ordinances. Every tool sold, every family heirloom discarded, every forged signature on contractor agreements all meticulously cataloged. Michael discovered Steve had been using Mom's information to apply for credit cards, 3 so far, with combined debts of $40,000. Mom had no idea. He'd also convinced her to add him to her bank accounts for emergency purposes, and regular transfers were flowing to Kyle and Lydia's accounts. Phase 2. Financial leverage. The private investigator uncovered Steve's hidden debts, $100,000 in back taxes from his failed business, an outstanding judgment from his last bankruptcy that he'd never disclosed. More interesting were the texts between him and Kyle discussing their big score once they secured the house. But the masterpiece was discovering Steve had taken out a fraudulent home improvement loan using forged documents, claiming to be the property owner. That was federal fraud, and the FBI takes mortgage fraud very seriously. Phase 3. Public pressure. This was Steve's own weapon turned against him. I quietly reached out to a friend who worked at the Portland Tribune, sharing the story of a historic craftsman home being illegally destroyed. The angle wasn't family drama, it was architectural preservation. The article would run with before and after photos, highlighting how a recent resident was destroying a locally registered historic property. I also contacted Dad's old construction crew, the legitimate contractors in town who remembered him fondly. Word spread quickly about what Steve was doing to Thomas Carter's legacy. The contractor Steve had hired for the flooring called me privately. I had no idea. "Rachel, if I'd known this was Tom's house, I never would have taken the job. That man was a legend." While building my arsenal, I played my role perfectly. I even approached Steve one evening with fake humility. "I've been thinking about your suggestion," I said, "about me finding my own place." His eyes lit up. "That's very mature of you, Rachel. I want Mom to be happy, but I'll need some help with a down payment for a new place. Maybe we could work out something with the house equity." The greed in his expression was barely concealed. "I'm sure we could arrange something fair. Perhaps you could sign over your portion of the deed, and we could give you a cash settlement." "That sounds reasonable. Can we have Michael Grant draw up the papers he handled Dad's affairs, so he has all the documentation?" Steve hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. Family should handle things properly." I scheduled the meeting for the following Thursday. Steve spent the week practically giddy, already planning his renovations once I was gone. He hired 2 more contractors, ran up another credit card in Mom's name, and Kyle started moving his entire home gym setup into the workshop. Wednesday night, I overheard Steve on the phone. "By Friday, we'll have full control. The daughter's finally breaking. I told you everyone has a price." I sat in my room, looking at the photo of Dad and me with the Mustang, the day we finally got it running. "Patience and planning," I whispered to his image. "Just like you taught me." The trap was set. Steve thought he was days away from his biggest score. He had no idea that Michael Grant had already filed the fraud reports, that the FBI had opened a case, that the Preservation Society was preparing an injunction, and that tomorrow's newspaper would feature his photo next to the headline, "Historic Home Destroyed by Alleged Fraudster." He thought my silence meant surrender. Tomorrow, he'd learn it was just the quiet before the storm. And unlike his manipulation and lies, everything I'd done was completely legal, thoroughly documented, and absolutely devastating. Dad always said the best revenge isn't loud or violent, it's precise, patient, and permanent. Steve Hollister was about to learn exactly what that meant. Thursday morning arrived with Steve wearing his best suit, confident he was hours away from victory. He'd even brought Kyle and Lydia to the meeting at Michael Grant's office, already discussing their plans for their property. "After we settle this, we should gut the second floor completely," Kyle was saying as we walked in. "Open concept is where the money is." Michael's conference room felt smaller with all of us there. Mom sat beside Steve, holding his hand, still unaware of what was about to unfold. My heart ached for her, but I'd learned that sometimes you have to let someone see the truth for themselves. "Before we discuss any transfer of property," Michael began, arranging his papers, "there are some matters that need addressing." Steve's smile flickered. "What matters?" "This is simple. Rachel has agreed to accept a settlement. Mr. Hollister, are you aware that falsifying ownership documents for a home equity loan constitutes federal fraud?" The room went silent. Steve's face drained of color. "I don't know what you're talking about." Michael slid a copy of the loan application across the table. Steve's forged signature, claiming to be the property owner, was clearly visible. "This loan was taken out 2 weeks ago. The FBI has been notified." "Mom," I said quietly, "check your credit card statements." With shaking hands, Mom pulled out her phone. Michael had helped me ensure she'd received the electronic statements that morning, the ones Steve had been hiding by intercepting the mail. $43,000. Mom's voice cracked. "Steve, what is this?" "Margaret, sweetheart, I can explain." "And this preservation violation," Michael continued, producing another document. "Destroying registered historic elements carries fines up to $250,000. Kyle stood up aggressively. "You set us up." "Sit down, Kyle," Michael said calmly. "Unless you'd like to discuss your own legal troubles, selling stolen property Thomas Carter's tools is still a crime, even if you thought you had permission." That's when Lydia made everything worse for them. In her panic, she turned on Steve. This was all his idea. He said the old lady was loaded and the daughter was a pushover. "Shut up," Steve snarled, his mask finally slipping completely. Mom pulled her hand away from his, staring at him like she was seeing him for the first time. "Old lady, is that what you call me?" I pulled out my phone and played the security camera recording Steve's voice filling the room. talking about the $500,000 score once he got rid of me. Mom's face crumbled. The pain in her eyes was devastating, but there was something else too fury, the kind I'd only seen once before, when someone had tried to lowball Dad on a construction contract. "You used me," she whispered. "You used my grief, my loneliness. Margaret, you're overreacting. Get out." Her voice was steel. "Get out of my daughter's house." "Our house?" Steve stood, his face red. "I have rights, I've been living there." "Actually," Michael interjected, "you don't. You were never added to any deed. You're a guest who has worn out their welcome, and given the criminal charges pending, I'd suggest you leave voluntarily before law enforcement gets involved." Steve turned to me, his composure completely shattered. "You little bitch. You think you've won, I'll destroy you. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are." "Mr. Hollister," Michael cut him off. "Threats are inadvisable, especially with witnesses present. My client has prepared a comprehensive file documenting your fraudulent activities, which is already in the hands of authorities. Your best option is to leave quietly." The next part happened fast. Steve lunged toward me, but Michael had wisely arranged for security. 2 officers, who'd been waiting outside, entered immediately. Kyle tried to intervene and ended up in handcuffs alongside his father. Lydia was frantically calling someone, begging for bail money. Mom sat frozen through it all, tears streaming down her face. After they were escorted out, she looked at me with broken eyes. "How long have you known?" "A few weeks, but Mom, I needed proof. He was too good at manipulation. I brought him into our home, your father's home. I let him." She covered her face. "Oh God, Rachel, I'm so sorry." I knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. "Mom, he's a professional con artist. He targeted you specifically because you were grieving. This isn't your fault. The house, all the damage, can be fixed, every bit of it. I documented everything original. Dad's crew will help restore it." She pulled me into a fierce hug, sobbing. "Your father would be so proud of you. You fought when I was too weak to see what was happening." Michael cleared his throat gently. "Mrs. Carter, we'll need to file restraining orders and begin the process of recovering the stolen funds. It won't be pleasant, but Rachel and I will handle everything." As we left the office, Mom stopped at the door. "Rachel, that promise you made to your father about protecting the house? Thank you for keeping it, even when it meant protecting it from me." That evening, I stood in Dad's workshop, surveying the damage. Kyle's gym equipment was gone, seized as evidence. The mirrors were cracked from his struggle with the officers, but underneath it all, Dad's workbench remained, solid and unmovable. I pulled out my phone and called Dad's old crew. "Hey, Jim, it's Rachel Carter. I need help restoring my father's workshop. Yeah, the house is finally clear." Steve wasn't finished. 2 weeks after the confrontation at Michael's office, he orchestrated his final desperate play. I came home from work to find over 30 people gathered on our front lawn and driveway, extended family, church members, neighbors, even some of Dad's old clients Steve had somehow contacted. "There she is," Steve announced from the porch. My porch flanked by Kyle and Lydia. They'd violated the restraining order, but they'd been clever about it. With this many witnesses, calling the police would look like I was the aggressor. Pastor David stepped forward, his face full of manufactured concern. "Rachel, we're here as a community to help heal this family. Steve has explained everything, how there's been a terrible misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I looked at the crowd of familiar faces, many of whom had attended Dad's funeral. "Is that what we're calling fraud now?" Steve had prepared them well. Aunt Carol spoke up. "Rachel, dear, Steve showed us the paperwork. He was only trying to help manage your mother's finances during her grief. With forged signatures and stolen credit cards." "Those are serious accusations," Steve said smoothly, his con man persona fully restored. "I've made some bookkeeping errors, perhaps, but nothing malicious. Your mother and I were building a life together, and you couldn't accept that." Mom emerged from the house then, and I saw Steve's confidence waver. She was carrying a box, the evidence box I'd compiled. "Margaret, sweetheart," Steve started, but Mom held up her hand. "I want everyone to see something," she said, her voice carrying across the yard. She pulled out the printed screenshots from the security camera. "This is Steve, in my husband's workshop, calling me the old lady and discussing how to steal my daughter's inheritance." She held up the credit card statements next. $43,000, charged without my knowledge. Then the loan documents. Federal fraud, using my home as collateral for his debts. The crowd began to murmur. Steve tried to interrupt, but Mom wasn't finished. "You all knew Thomas Carter," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "He built half your homes, fixed your roofs without taking payment when times were tough. And this man," she pointed at Steve, "destroyed Thomas's workshop, sold his tools, tried to steal the house Thomas built with his own hands." "Those are lies," Kyle shouted, but his outburst only made him look more guilty. I stepped forward with my laptop. "Would everyone like to see the video? I have Steve on camera discussing his plans. I have receipts for illegal renovations. I have the FBI case number for the fraud investigation." The crowd was shifting now, backing away from Steve. Some were already leaving, embarrassed to have been pulled into this. But I wasn't done. I'd prepared for this possibility, knowing Steve might try one last manipulation. I pulled up the Portland Tribune article on my phone and projected it onto my laptop screen, holding it up for everyone to see. "This ran yesterday," I announced. The headline read, "Historic Craftsman Home Saved from Destruction, Con Artist Arrested for Fraud." Steve's mugshot was prominently featured. That's not accurate," Steve sputtered, but the damage was done. "Jim," I called out, and Jim Patterson, Dad's former foreman, stepped out from behind his truck with 5 other crew members. "These men worked with my father for 20 years. Tell everyone what you found when you came to assess the damage." Jim's weathered face was grim. "Steve Hollister destroyed architectural elements that were on the historic register, ripped out handcrafted built-ins that Thomas spent 3 months creating, tried to sell Thomas's 100-year-old hand tools at a garage sale for pocket change. Any real contractor would know the value of what was destroyed. This was either gross incompetence or deliberate destruction." "We're pressing charges," another crew member added, "for vandalism of historic property." Steve's carefully assembled crowd was dissolving. Pastor David looked mortified. Aunt Carol wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. The neighbors were already walking away, whispering among themselves. "This isn't over," Steve hissed, stepping toward me, but Jim and his crew moved forward as one unit, creating a wall between us. "Yes, it is," I said firmly. "You have 5 minutes to leave before I call the police about the restraining order violation. And this time, I have 30 witnesses to your harassment." Kyle started to speak, but Lydia grabbed his arm. "Dad, we need to go. Now." She was looking at her phone, probably seeing the social media explosion as the Tribune article spread through our community. Steve stood there for a moment, his con finally, completely shattered. The man who'd walked into our lives with practiced charm and calculated moves was exposed as nothing more than a common thief. "You'll regret this," he said quietly, but the threat was empty. He had nothing left to threaten with. As they drove away, Mom stood beside me on the porch Thomas built. "I'm filing for a restraining order extension tomorrow," she said, "and pressing full charges for the fraud." The crowd had dispersed, leaving only Jim and his crew. "We can start restoration work this weekend. Rachel," Jim said, "the boys and I want to do it at cost our way of honoring Thomas." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Dad's community, his real community, was still here. That night, Mom and I sat in the damaged kitchen, eating takeout and planning the restoration. For the first time in over a year, the house felt like home again, not because Steve was gone, but because the truth had finally been told. "Your father always said you were the strongest person he knew," Mom said softly. "I should have listened to him. I should have listened to you." "We both learned something," I replied. "Dad protected us even after he was gone. His reputation, his relationships, His planning, they all mattered in the end. Tomorrow, the real work would begin, not just repairing the house, but rebuilding the trust and peace Steve had tried to destroy. But tonight, for the first time in months, we were free. 6 months later, I stood in the fully restored workshop, running my hand along the rebuilt shelves where Dad's tools recovered from various pawn shops and garage sale buyers hung in their original positions. Jim and his crew had worked miracles. The original hardwood floors had been sourced from a salvage yard specializing in historic lumber. Every built-in, every detail Dad had crafted, had been meticulously recreated using his original sketches we'd found in the attic. The Mustang gleamed in its spot, fully restored once again. I'd spent every weekend working on it, just like Dad and I used to. Only this time, Mom joined me. She'd never shown interest in cars before, but now she said it helped her feel connected to him. We'd work in comfortable silence, occasionally sharing memories, healing together with grease under our fingernails. Steve got 5 years in federal prison for fraud, plus state charges for the property destruction. Kyle received 18 months for theft and assault. Lydia got probation and community service, which she served at a senior center. A fitting irony, the FBI recovered some of the stolen money, though not all. It didn't matter. What mattered was that they couldn't hurt anyone else. Mom transformed through it all. The grief that had made her vulnerable to Steve's manipulation evolved into a fierce protectiveness. She started volunteering at the church's grief support group not as a participant, but as a facilitator, helping others recognize the warning signs of predatory behavior during vulnerable times. Grief makes us do things we'd never normally consider, she'd tell the group, but that doesn't mean we deserve to be victimized. The house became something more than just our home. It became a symbol in our community of resilience, of heritage worth protecting. The Historical Society featured it in their annual tour, with a plaque reading, "The Carter House built 1985 by Thomas Carter, a testament to traditional craftsmanship and family legacy." I kept my promise to expand my role at Nexora Technologies, but I also started something new, using my software skills. I created a database for families to document their homes' histories, their heirlooms, their legal documents protection against the Steve Hollisters of the world. It started local but grew quickly. Turns out, we weren't the only family who'd faced this kind of threat. One evening, as Mom and I sat on the restored front porch, she asked, "Do you forgive me?" "There's nothing to forgive, Mom. He was a professional manipulator. But I chose him over you. I let him into our home. You chose companionship over loneliness. That's human. What matters is that when the truth came out, you stood with me." She squeezed my hand. "Your father would be so proud. You didn't just save the house, you saved me." A car pulled up then, and Michael Grant stepped out, carrying a bottle of wine and an envelope. "Thought you'd want to see this," he said, handing me the envelope. Inside was a letter from Steve's previous victim, thanking me for having the courage to expose him. She'd been too ashamed to come forward, but my case had given her closure. We sat together that evening, Mom, Michael, and I toasting Dad's memory and the house he'd built. Not just the physical structure, but the foundation of values that couldn't be destroyed by any con man's schemes. Looking back, I realized Steve had actually taught me something valuable. He'd shown me that Dad's real legacy wasn't just in wood and nails, it was in the strength he'd instilled in me, the community he'd built around us, and the love that no fraud could counterfeit. The workshop still smells like sawdust and motor oil. The Mustang still purrs like it did the day Dad and I first got it running. And every morning, when I make coffee in the kitchen Dad designed, I thank him for teaching me that some things are worth fighting for, no matter how many people tell you to walk away. Steve thought I'd leave quietly because that's what polite, well-behaved daughters do. He didn't understand that Thomas Carter didn't raise me to be polite. He raised me to be strong, to be smart, and to protect what matters. And in the end, that made all the difference. The house stands strong, just like Dad built it, just like he built me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below, so we can connect with others who face similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your own thoughts and experiences. Your stories matter too. And together, we're stronger than any manipulator who tries to tear our families apart.